All right, so Chapter 10, Section 2 deals with solving quadratic equations using a technique called completing the square. Now, we will use this technique when we cannot do the following two things. First, there's no way to isolate the quadratic term, like in Section 1. And then number 2, and this is probably the more important one, which is you cannot factor the quadratic. Remember, not every quadratic equation can be factored. All right, we just happen to luck out with all of them that did factor. So that, like I said, so then the question becomes, what if you cannot factor? Well, to do that, we use this technique right here, which is called completing the square. So the first thing you're going to do is you got to make sure that your quadratic equation is in this form at the top right of your screen. So step 1 says to isolate the variable terms on one side of the equation and the constant terms on the opposite side. So, you know, if you have something that looks like this, like x squared plus 3x plus 1 equals 0, what you're going to have to do is subtract 1 from both sides first. Okay, and then you could start your problem. So step 1 is what we just did. Isolate the variable term on both sides of the, isolate the variable terms on one side of the equation, constant terms on the opposite side of the equation. Step 2, you're going to take the b coefficient. So the b coefficient, I'm going to highlight it here for us so you can see it. So we're going to take b and divide that number by 2. Whatever it is, you're going to divide it by 2 and circle the result. Okay? Now, step 3 says use the result from step 2 and square it. Add this number to both sides of your equation. Now, step 4 is very important because you're going to factor the left side, and it's always going to factor down into x, or the quantity x plus or minus whatever that number is, plus or minus some number, all raised to the second power. Now, the result that you circled in step 2 will be that number. It will always be that number. Okay, so you don't even have to really think about factoring it. It just factors like that. And then step 5, we're going to go ahead and use the square root property and simplify. So let me show you an example of how this looks, okay? So we're going to solve x to the second minus 4x equals 12 by completing the square. Okay? Excuse me. So here we go. Step 1. We need to get it into the form that we want. And luckily for us, it's already there. We got the variable terms on one side, constant terms on the opposite side. Okay? Now, I did do something here, which is I left this space. Okay? So if you want to, you can leave a space. I highly recommend it, but you don't have to. But personally, I like to recommend it. Now, step 2. We take the b term, which is going to be negative 4, that b coefficient, and we divide it by 2, and then we circle it. Step 3, we take the result from the previous step, negative 2, and we put it in parentheses and square it, and that's going to equal 4. Okay? Now, this number 4 is what we add to both sides of the equation. Okay, you will always add it to both sides of the equation. All right? So what we have here is this, and I'm going to write it out. We have x squared minus 4x plus 4 equals 16. Okay? Step 4. We need to factor this left-hand side. But like I said, the answer, or the factored form of x squared minus 4x plus 4 will always be x, like the quantity of x, and then let me highlight it here for us. that number right there, that whatever that number is from step 2, you put it right there. And then on the right-hand side, you get 16. Okay? And then finally, step 5. I'm just rewriting the problem real fast. We take the square root property of both sides. We get x minus 2 on the left. On the right-hand side, we get plus or minus 4. And now we simplify by adding 2 to both sides. This gives us x equals 2 plus or minus 4, which we know we can separate into x equals 2 plus 4 or x equals 2 minus 4. So that gives me x equals 6 or x equals negative 2. And that is how we complete the square. Now, every problem is done the same exact way. So I'm just going to go ahead and do some examples now. Okay? So let's try this one here. Let's solve x squared plus 4x plus 21 equals 0 by completing the square. Okay? Step 1. Now, if you notice, we have our variable terms and the constant term on the same side. So we're going to have to move this over here. That's what step 1 does for us. So I'm going to rewrite the problem. And then I'm just going to subtract 21 from both sides. Okay? That's going to give me x squared plus 4x. Remember, leave a space. Minus 21. Now, step 2, we take that b coefficient, in this case it's going to be a 4, we divide it by 2, and circle it. Step 3, we're going to use the result from step 2, which is 2, put it in parentheses and square it. And that's the number we're going to add to both sides of our equation. So I'm just going to write x squared plus 4x plus 4 equals negative 17. Step 4, we're going to factor this, but we know it's going to factor down into x plus 2 quantity squared. If you're wondering where I got the plus 2, I'm going to highlight it. It comes from step number 2. It's right there. See, that's why we circle it. So we remember that's where that number is. Okay? That's where that number is. Now, step 5, we're going to take the square root property of both sides. And then we run into a massive problem. Because we know you cannot have a negative underneath the square root. Therefore, we stop. And we just write non-real result. Okay, and there's nothing we can do about that. All right, let's try another one here. Let's try another one. We're going to do t squared minus 10t equals 11. Solve by completing the square. I'm just going to write CTS for complete the square. So step 1, it's already done. That's great. We don't have to worry about moving anything. Step 2, we're going to take negative 10 and divide it by 2. That gives us negative 5. Circle it. Step 3, put negative 5 in parentheses and raise it to the second power. And that's going to be 25. So I'm going to add 25 to both sides. Okay? So that's going to give me t to the second minus 10t plus 25 equals 11 plus 25, I think, is 36. Step 4, we're going to factor. So we know we can factor this left-hand side. And it will always factor down into a binomial squared. And where did that minus 5 come from? Right here from step 2, staring you in the face. All right. And then finally, step 5. We're just going to go ahead and take the square root of both sides. That's going to give me t minus 5 equals plus or minus 6. And then I'm going to add 5 to both sides. They give me t equals 5 plus or minus 6. And then finally separate to give me t equals 5 plus 6 or t equals 5 minus 6. So that's going to be t equals 11 or t equals negative 1. All right, now let's do another example here, but this time when we simplify, it's not going to be as pretty as we want it to be. But that's okay because we know how to deal with that. So let's solve y squared minus 18y equals plus 6 equals 0 by completing the square. Okay? So step 1, I need to take this constant term, which is the positive 6, and I need to move it over to the right side. So minus 6 minus 6. So that gives me y squared minus 18y, leave a space, equals negative 6. Step 2, we're going to take that b coefficient, which is negative 18. We're going to divide it by 2 to give us negative 9, and we circle it. Step 3, let's take negative 9 and square it. That's going to give us 81. Now we're going to add 81 to both sides of the equation now. Okay? So that's going to give me y squared minus 18y plus 81 equals negative 6 plus 81 is 75. Step 4, we can factor this, and that will factor down into y minus 9 quantity squared equals 75. And then finally, step 5, we're going to go ahead and just square root both sides. Don't forget to add your plus or minus. And like I said, here's where it's not as pretty as we like, because on the left-hand side, you get y minus 9. But on the right-hand side, we actually have to simplify the square root of 75, which is actually turns out to be 5 square root of 3. Finally, we will just add 9 to both sides for a final result of 9 plus or minus 5 square roots of 3. So like I said, it's not the prettiest answer, but it works. Okay? So that's going to be it for this video. I hope you found it enjoyable, and we got one more section to do, and then we are done for the semester. So the next one will deal with a quadratic equation, which is so easy. It's the easiest thing that you're gonna encounter. So I hope you have fun with it. See you in the next video. Bye.